I was with a young lady before. I was with a young lady.
Really appreciate you coming on. On today's episode, we talk about reforms policies for the private rented sector, address critics who say it's a wasted vote, and ask whether reform will repeal Section 24, with our special guest, Reform candidate for Livingston, David McLennan. Thank you for joining us today, David, in the middle of a
Pleasure.
general election campaign. Really appreciate
Pleasure.
you coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. So, this general election campaign is being billed by Nigel Farage, your leader, as the dullest in history. Members of the British public are describing Rishi Sunak as being out of touch and Keir Starmer as a political robot. Now, your background stands out as you were a former police officer, you've been a landlord for many, many years, you've even delivered a baby on a bus, and now you are the Reform candidate for Livingston in Scotland. So, I've given 118 viewers there a little bit about your background, but can you just tell us a little bit more about your background, such as how you became a landlord?
Sure. Back in 1984, I was with a young lady who had a property of her own, and we decided to move into my property, which meant that her property was empty. So I suggested that we let it out. We had something like 40 people applied for the one flat, and I put a note out the next week looking for landlords that had empty properties, and the whole thing started from there. So we filled another 4 properties, and I think within a month I had 8 or 9 properties that I really didn't know how to look after, but decided to find out how to do it, and it started from there. I then went on to form a fairly large business in Edinburgh, mainly student predominated. I did a lot of work, HMO work when that came along, and we were guided when I started by the Rent Scotland Act of '74, which basically gave tenants the right to remain. And it's interesting that we've almost come full circle in that today.
So you started off quite small then, and then you grew and grew. So you've been in the business for a long time, 40 years?
Yeah, about 40 years now. Yeah. So I've seen many different types of tenure. I was lucky enough to do a property deal when I was about 40 that gave me enough money to choose to be able to retire. I chose to retire, but I also chose to keep working, if that makes sense. And I worked with housing associations, with local authorities, with private agencies, and with solicitors' agencies. And I also went to university at the age of 51 to do a degree in housing.
Wow, which university did you go to?
Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh. Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh, yeah.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And at the age of 51 as well. That's great.
Many of the students thought I was the teacher for the first little while, so it was quite interesting.
Interested indeed. Now, onto the politics. So, as you have seen from Property 118, a lot of viewers are very pro-reform, but there are still some that are undecided. So quite simply, why should landlords vote reform?
1 o'clock today is the launch of our official contract with you. And one of the first things that attracted me to reform was the fact that it was a contract, a two-way street, not a manifesto, which is kind of dictatorial in that this is what we're going to do to you. The contract is what we're going to do for you and how we're going to work it. The other thing that attracted me was the fact that at the heart of the housing section of the reform policy is mortgage interest relief, Section 24. We'll absolutely bring Section 24 back. We'll absolutely bring the 10% wear and tear allowance back. And we'll absolutely address the ridiculous situation that is Section 21.
We will come on to those policies in a little while. But I have to ask, because there are loads of critics from reform, none other than the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He said that a vote for reform is a vote for Keir Starmer. And some landlords may be saying that Reform has great policies, but realistically, I cannot vote for you because you're unlikely to win. So, what do you say to those critics?
So the first thing I would say is that we're being honest in saying that our vision is 2029. You know, we are a new party. We're just getting established. We are coming into the morass of politics, as it were, as a new boys in town. And we know that we're not going to win this election. I think it will be a victory for us if we get more MPs selected. But, you know, we're realistic about the likelihood of that happening. This, however, is the start of the journey of 1,000 miles. This is the start of the campaign, really, for 2029 for English electors and for 2026 for those of us up in Scotland when we contest for the Holiday elections.
What do you say to voters that will say the reform's only just going to split the Labour vote? That it's just going to let Labour in with a supermajority?
Nigel Farage has already alluded to the fact that Labour have already won the election. It's just a question of how big the majority is going to be. I don't think that a vote for reform is going to do anything other than encourage the other parties to think that they're doing better than they actually are. Again, we're quite open and quite straight about the fact that it's 2029 that the English electorate is going to be governed, we hope, by reform. So is it a wasted vote? I don't think it is. I think what you're doing is cementing the start of the revolution, if you like, that is reform and our policies, which are completely different to the policies that the mainstay parties are promoting just now.
I see. So you're sort of looking to the future for, obviously, with 2029.
Very much so. And I think the parties saying that a vote's wasted, they're just trying to instill some sort of fear into the electorate that by voting for reform, a progressive party, they are in fact doing themselves out of a vote. But I don't think that's the case at all.
Now, you were talking a little bit earlier about landlords, about what you can do for landlords. So what can you do for the private rented sector as a whole? How can reform help the private rented sector?
The private rented sector at the moment is in danger of disintegrating totally. If we look back to Right to Buy with Margaret Thatcher, that was the start of the private rental sector effectively, because houses were being bought and then let out to people that really didn't have the opportunity to do it. And the whole idea around that generation of the 80s and early 90s was the fact that you could get on and be somebody yourself, that you didn't have to work for a company, and that needed housing. And the Right to Buy, which was originally a Labour idea, but which was brought to power by Margaret Thatcher, meant that there was housing available for people to become more transient. What we're planning to do is to almost take us back to that era where landlords will be able to gain possession of their house. Absolutely. Landlords will be able to claim mortgage interest as an expense. Absolutely. The 10% wear and tear allowance. Absolutely. Where it's not the landlord's fault that social housing doesn't exist anymore. And the days of landlords being used as de facto social housing by providers that just aren't providing the social housing for those that need it, it's over. So we are looking to be on the landlord's side. We're very much a landlord's party. And the way that Labour is practically castigating landlords and almost doing a tenant's right to stay as opposed to a landlord's right to repossess, I think will come back to bite them.
And you're obviously saying there about Section 24. A lot of landlords will be very happy to hear that you want to repeal it. But are these policies fully funded and costed?
Absolutely. At 1 o'clock today, at 1 o'clock, yeah, it is 1 o'clock. Sorry, just 1 o'clock today, the Reform Party contract, the final version comes out. There's a big press release about it. And you'll see in there that all the policies are fully costed, they're fully funded. We have a panel of 3 senior economists, one of whom is a household name, but I can't mention that, who have checked to make sure that the promises that we are making are based on reality and they're not just figures that we're plucking out of the air. So they are fully funded, they are fully costed.
Okay, well, we will have to see in the manifesto at 1 o'clock today. So
Contract.
the contract, sorry, of course, you call it a contract for the people, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. So, as I mentioned earlier, and you were mentioning as well, a lot of landlords feel let down by the Conservative government. They feel like they're not being listened to. I mean, particularly with all the rules and regulations that have come in England, particularly with the Renters Reform Bill. So, what do you think about what the Conservative government has done to the private rented sector?
Well, the first thing is that the Renters Reform Bill is not law. It didn't quite get to becoming law at the moment. However, I think it's very significant that the fact it was even being considered by a Conservative government that is supposed to be pro-landlord, with the background of the right to buy and the background of the assured tenancies that they introduced, which gave great flexibility to both landlords and tenants, but gave the fundamental right of possession. And I can't stress enough, this is one of the big things that we major on. I am having an input into policy in Scotland on the housing matter. And it's absolutely one of the things that we will ensure, we will enshrine it in the legislation that possession is going to be made available. That's not to say that we don't have sympathy, if you like, for the plight of tenants. It's not our fault that prices have escalated to the level they've gone to. It's not our fault that mortgage interest rates are the rate that they are just now. And if Labour gets in, they're talking about rent freezes, a 3% rent cap. They're talking about capital gains tax. When you eventually sell your house, you'll pay more in capital gains tax from the profits. It's completely anti-competitive and anti-landlord.
Would reform bring back the Renters Reform Bill or abolish it? As we're saying, Labour say they want to resurrect the Renters Reform Bill, and the Conservative Party have also said they want to bring back the Renters Reform Bill. So would reform scrap it?
I think we absolutely would in its current form. It may be that we bring it back in an amended form, but it'll be more in line with our politics and more in line with the pro-landlord stance that we have. The idea that you cannot gain possession of your house to sell it or because your circumstances have changed is absolutely fundamental to being a landlord. So yes, I don't know what exactly the plans will be, but we will have some form of Renters Reform Bill because I think we'll have some form of Renters Reform Bill in England because we're going to have to put our own policies into a new Renters Reform Bill. So it won't be the Conservative bill, it'll be our Renters Reform Bill, but with reform policies in it.
I see. Okay, that's really interesting. And obviously with a pro-landlord stance, I imagine, for the Renters Reform Bill?
Very much. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you don't have private landlords, you have a huge, huge issue with where people go. Okay, we are the de facto place for people to go, and it's absolutely right that we encourage landlords to stay and even take on new properties. And that's what we hope to do with bringing back Section 24 and the other policies that will come out in time.
So we've heard from Labour saying that they're going to abolish Section 21 immediately. And the Conservatives have said when the courts are ready, they'll abolish Section 21. So what is Reform's position on Section 21 eviction notices? Would you do the same as the Conservatives and Labour?
So with the caveat that I'm Scottish and in the Scottish legislature, my understanding is that we would absolutely not abolish Section 21. Section 21 is the fundamental right for the landlord to regain possession of his or her property. And that is at the core of our housing manifesto.
A lot of landlords will be very happy to hear that, as obviously if you've got a bad tenant and it's and Labour and Conservatives are saying they're going to abolish Section 21, that's going to be very hard for them. So
So
I
we're
want to...
we're on the side of, sorry,
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say we're on the side of the landlord very much. Tenants are being protected and looking to be protected by Labour far more strictly than they are just now, and we're just against it completely.
And now, if we move on to Labour's supposed proposed attack on personal property, we've heard from Jonathan Ashworth this morning, and he's failed to say whether Labour will increase capital gains tax or not. He hasn't given a clear answer to that. So, what's your opinion on Labour's proposed attack on personal property?
As far as we can see at the moment, Labour have a huge hole in their finances of about 28 billion or so that they're going to have to fill from somewhere. Don't kid yourself. Capital gains tax is going to be hit. There was even talk about putting capital gains tax on your personal primary residence disposal. That may have been set aside, but it's always something that they can fall back on once they're in power. Remember, what they say now and what they do when they're in power are two separate things. And my feeling is that they have to fill this 28 billion hole from somewhere. They haven't told us how they're going to fill it, so I leave it to your imaginations as to how they can do it quickly and easily. Capital gains tax to me is the obvious one.
So, what are reforms plans regarding personal properties? I've got a yes or no question for you. Would you abolish stamp duty?
Yes.
You would?
Under £750,000, you'll pay no stamp duty. Inheritance tax, if you have an estate that's under £2 million in value, you'll pay no inheritance tax. We are a progressive, forward-thinking, landlord-friendly party. We need somewhere for people to stay, but on our terms, not on theirs.
So I just want to clarify quickly, you said that you'd abolish inheritance tax completely.
No, we'd
Not completely.
abolish it. No, we'd abolish inheritance tax for estates valued at under £2 million, not completely.
I see, okay, under £2 million. Thank you for clarifying that. So, my last question, landlords, Property 118 landlords that have been watching this, and some might still be on the fence. So, give us a quick pitch for your vote, and why should the Reform Party get it?
The Reform Party is a completely different political animal to anything that you've seen or heard over the past 40, 50 years. Our candidates are normal people. They have working lives. They have working experience. They are not professional politicians. They are not professional civil servants. They are people that have done it the hard way, as indeed many of your landlords have themselves, as indeed I did. We've seen life, how hard it can be, but we're going to do our best to change the direction of this country, to give you landlords and the people some sense of direction and try and make Britain great again.
That's the perfect way to end it, David. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I really appreciate your time. Thank you for your time.